Hello, my name is Stavina House, and I ran a class on tying Celtic and Chinese good luck charm knots in December of 2022. But the day before the class, there was a big winter storm, and I know some students couldn't make it. So I've put together this video for the students who were there, as well as the students who were not able to attend, so you can have all of the information that I had wanted to share in my class. Even with editing it down, this video is almost an hour long, so it's going to go through a wide variety of things. Most of it I tried to cover in the 2-hour class. However, there's one knot near the end, well actually it's partway through the middle in this video, that I didn't get to show all of my students. I just worked through techniques that would help you get to those knots, but I will try to really focus on some really fun knots that give you a variety of crafts and projects that you can share with friends. So starting off, I like to use graph paper and doodle knots. Knots have been around historically, since prehistory, from pre-written record. We have knots showing up in a variety of cultures, from Mesoamerica, what we consider Celtic knots in the British Isles, in through Scandinavia with their influence as well, and also happening in Asia. So this style of art is used in a variety of different cultures. So what might be a Celtic knot to one person is going to be a Chinese luck knot to another person. It's going to be a symbol of one thing to one group and a symbol of something else to another. But for the most part, Celtic knots and Chinese luck knots are always positive symbols. I don't think of any of them as negative, as far as I have seen. When I doodle knots, I start off just with a hex pattern, like a tic-tac-toe board, and then I hook it up together to make it into a continuous loop. If you can just imagine it being one line making the shape, that's how I start off. And then I'll move on from that to maybe doing 3 lines in a hash pattern, and then hooking those up and making a bunch of different doodles. The more doodles, the better. It kind of gets your brain into the habit of doing these things. And you will find that when you doodle a while, you will see those same knots or patterns showing up in other places. Some of the simplest knots have been reproduced in China as well as the British Isles, so just doodle as much as you like doing this sort of activity. You don't necessarily have to have graph paper to do this. I will sometimes make a shape just out of my own hash line and then elaborate on that just on plain paper. And you can get quite a variety of beautiful designs. If you're trying to make a design that is just one line, you might want to, after you make it, go along it with a colored marker and see if you can trace out the entire object with just one color. You might find after a while that you have made some objects that use more than one color, and that just means that if you were to try to reproduce this with wire or cord, you would have to use multiple different pieces to make the shape that you're interested in. Now, something that I like to do when I've got a design that I really enjoy and I want to try to make it into another, I want to try to make it into a 3-dimensional piece, is I will draft it out and then, like you do with bubble letters, kind of imagine it, instead of being a single line, as a ribbon or a cord. One of the students in class mentioned, oh, it's kind of like a pie crust where you've got the different ribbons of pie dough that you're weaving in and out. That's kind of an interesting trick for your brain to do, to translate 2-dimensional lines on a paper into something that has the image of 3 dimensions. And I think it's good practice to think about that, because when you view one of these 2-dimensional objects, you can eventually translate those into being a pattern that you use to make a knot out of cord or ribbon or wire later on. Now, one of the most common geometric shapes that uses a single line is the star, little 5-pointed star. Everybody's been doodling those since childhood, but you can use a similar technique to make a multi-pointed star, such as a 7-pointed star. What I do is I make dots to aim at, and then I will go around the circle of dots to make my star. I'm going to be using that same technique of drawing out the object a little bit larger than I need it to be, and then going back through and rendering it as though it was a three-dimensional object. And that way I'm going to use it as a pattern with line and corkboard pinning things down so that I can duplicate that shape with cording. Once you have your shape decided on, go ahead and get some corkboard and some long tacks. You could use sewing pins, but I find that I will bend them, so I like using tacks or map pins. Those are a little bit sturdier. And once you have your pins at all of the vital points on your design, take your cord. I like using paracord because it's nice three-dimensional and not too slippery. Soutache braid is pretty, but it is very slippery, so definitely need to do some practice before you take on more difficult materials for these designs. So you start off by just pinning down the points and then following the pattern. When it needs to go under, weave it under, pull it through, and then tack it down so that it doesn't slide around on you. When it needs to go over the top, and again when it needs to go under, weave it underneath, pull it through, and tack it down, and that will help you get the basics of the shape. This is really good for simple designs, and sometimes I will use it for more complex designs, particularly if I'm going off of someone else's instructions and it just has you laying things down and it's not springing apart. I find that having the thumbtacks there to follow the instructions or the pattern really does help when I'm trying to make these objects. Now, I could stop with a single cord all the way around, but I find that particularly with a lot of these knots, if you at least do double or sometimes 3 times around, you will get a nice, thick, lush looking knot that holds together quite well. If you choose to just do a single line, that's just fine. I would recommend when you finish up the knot, make sure that you hit it with something like a spray starch to kind of hold its shape, because it doesn't have enough material to hold its shape on its own. Once you've had a lot of practice with the pins, you might try to do your knots freeform, and that's great. It's a good practice to do. However, things will kind of slide around on you, but you can make them larger or out of different materials once you're more comfortable doing them freehand. Again, you can see when I'm trying to tie mine, it's attempting to spring apart. So just be patient with yourself and try to make one shape multiple times so that you're very confident with how it forms up. I would say at least a dozen times with one knot before going on to the next one. That way you can see yourself improving, and maybe you can go back and redo some of your earlier work so that the design shows a little bit more easily. You can see on this star that I'm making right here, at first it just seems like a little loop of twisted cord, but as I slowly go around and weave back in the tail so that I've got multiple lines going around in the star shape, it starts to take form. There is a maximum amount that you can do this. Eventually, there will just not be enough room to weave the cord around itself. And when you hit that point, you know, because you just cannot fit the cord in anymore. But you're usually good for at least 2 or 3 rounds if you've got about 1 meter or a yard of cord that you're working with. Now, one way of finishing off your pieces is to use pony beads. When you're working with parachute cords, it does melt under heat. So to get the beads on, I will sometimes melt whatever cut end that I have, and with my fingers, which I know is not advisable if you've got very sensitive hands, but my hands have been burnt so many times I barely feel anything in the tips. Just heat it up and then smooth it out so that the bead can go over the top. And then when you're ready to finish it, you're going to cut and then melt the cord again, and then slide the beads over the molten part so that the plastic holds those beads right over the joint. Now, there's some designs that just do not work very well with cord because they have an open loop. You can use something with wire. You can try it with chenille stems. That's an inexpensive way, but I do not recommend those to begin with. Save wire for later on once you've had more practice. In this design, I'm going to be making a classic Chinese luck knot. You will see these instructions online, and they are just lovely. However, whenever I see the instructions, they just have the line laying out, not being tacked down, and I find using the corkboard and thumbtack technique really helps because I just do not have enough fingers to hold things otherwise. Once you have this cross shape, you're going to take the loose tails, bring them up, and then have a little gap space at the base so that you can weave the last portion through. So I'll just hold that with a little tack so that I don't lose that. Then you're going to take the next one and go over the tails and the top part of the cross. Take the top part of the cross and go over the one that just went over it and the side of the cross, and then on that last side you're going to take it over the top, and that little gap that we left in there, that's where you're going to leave the tail. Now you can remove the pins and tighten the whole knot down towards the center, just tugging on the loops and the tail. And you'll see that this cross has now flipped so that the tails are up and the top part is down. That is how you're supposed to do it. And just make sure that you don't have any extra twists in the line so that the cords lay parallel to each other instead of knotting up on top of each other. Now there's one more part to this knot, and that is doing the exact same thing that you just did, only in the opposite direction. So I will set my cross back down so that the top loop is back at the top, and I will take the tails, and on the opposite side that I did before, I will bring them up over the side, take that side over and across the middle, leaving that little gap. Take the top and bring it over the part that just went over it, and the side, and then take the side over that top and in through that little gap that I left. Once that's laced through, I'm going to tighten down all sides, and you'll see that slowly, when you tighten it down, the two sides will end up resembling each other, and it's a good chance to get out any little twists that you have so that the knot evens out. And you can tug on the little tiny I guess you could call them petals that are around the center to give them a little bit more space, or leave them tight up against the knot. And that is the classic Chinese luck knot for if you celebrate Asian New Year or if you have friends that do. It makes a beautiful ornament for various different holidays, and it's a symbol of luck and prosperity. So it's an appropriate gift for just about anything, birthdays, Christmas, or other holidays. Now, how I like to finish these is I will end up with a super long tail, so I will cut that to whatever I think is a proper dimension for the ornament that I have at hand. Cut my parachute cord, and I find that the inner fibers are a little bit too much plastic to melt, so I will actually tug them out, trim them off, and then slide the outer part of the parachute cord over the ends, and then just melt that part to make lacing on beads and other things easier. And I find that that just makes a cleaner end to my projects. Otherwise, I end up with a big ball of melted plastic. Again, if you've got delicate fingers, you might want to consider using tweezers or another device to shape the molten plastic. Otherwise, you might burn yourself. Slide on your beads. I chose gold because it's a good complement to the red. Whatever color of cord you were using, you can of course use beads that either complement or blend in. And in Chinese knots, you'll often have them loose, so I will just melt the ends and smush them flat so that the bead is actually melted into that plastic end and doesn't slide off. Because some of my students had to leave early due to the weather, I wasn't able to show this particular knot, but it's a nice one to do in your free hands instead of with the corkboard. You make a loop, and then you cross over that very same loop with the line, and this knot would just fall apart if we were to lift it up right now. It's not woven in. But you take the long tail, and you go underneath the other loose part, and then weave it in and out of the upper loops. Just like you did with drawing, you need to just keep track of when it's gone underneath. If it's gone under, the next one you go over, then under, then over. And this is what's sometimes called the Celtic double coin knot. It's a symbol of prosperity both in Celtic culture as well as Chinese culture. It can be worn as a lanyard or a necklace, but it can also be turned into a full close-end knot in the Celtic style if you connect the two tails together. Now this knot gets used over and over again. So this isn't the only time I'm going to show it in the video. It's going to be shown again and again because it is the basis of a multitude of other knots. Now if I wanted to, I could just seal this piece up as one continuous knot and slide a bead over the top of the molten plastic, and then I would have a closed loop Celtic knot. We're going to do that knot again, one loop, and then set another loop over the top. Take the long tail, weave it underneath the short tail, then over and under, over and under again. And then you have the double coin knot. Okay, so we're starting there, just like we did before. Slide it out so that you've got some nice long tails. Try to get all the loops evenly sized. And now we're going to weave this very same line all the way back around itself. Now this technique is just following the exact same line that we did before, and we're going to go parallel to it. So over and under, just as it did before, and just keep following parallel to itself. This will get you a design that is very similar to that single line. However, this one will be fuller, flatter, and hold its own shape a little bit better than if you had just left it as the single line. The single line may need starch or some other stiffener. This one will hold its shape itself, but depending on how much or how little line you have, you may find that it's difficult towards the end to actually get it all the way around. Once you have run out of one of the tails, you can then go back to the other one to get the other side filled in. On this particular design, I like to have them meeting in the middle because I can melt that there and just push them together with a thick thumbtack while they're still melted, and it hides the end right there in the center belly button. Okay, we're doing that Celtic coin knot again. One loop on the bottom, another loop on top, under the tail, over, under, and we have it. Now this time around, I'm going to do that same parallel line thing, but I'm going to do it with another color. Technically, you could try tying this with two lines that are contrasting colors, but I find that I will get myself mixed up and end up with random twists and lose a line. So I like to make my basic shape and then follow it around with another color. Now, this one I'm going to go just parallel to and show how that kind of knot looks once you go around. It really is a nice effect to have multiple colors, but it does not give you the same flat design as the previous one. On this one, I'm doing the same thing, but instead of going parallel on every corner, I'm letting the cords twist so that what had been on the inside goes to the outside. And that will make this sort of double line design a little bit more flat. Now this is a little bit tricky to keep track of where you're going over and under, so just pay very close attention to which line that you're looking at. You might have to go back and undo. Here's a really nice shot showing the difference between having the same color cord on the outside each time and having a twist at the edges. All right. Again, we're making that Celtic double coin knot. Over, under, over, under. Almost lost a tail there. Yep, it undid itself. Okay, try that again. Loop over, over, under the tail, over, under. That's where I'm going wrong. Over, under, over, under. Keep track of those tails and draw it out. All right, so for this one, we're doing what's sometimes called a frog button or a Celtic knot button. And we are using this very same technique with the Celtic double knot, double coin knot. And this time we're going to weave back through, but we're going to tighten it down as we do that. And as you tighten, this knot will slowly form a ball if you don't keep it loose. So it's one of those things that you just have to trust in the process, go over, under, and keep following the same knot, but tighten it down as you go. Not so much that you can't slide it through anymore, but enough that it starts making a slight bowl shape. And then once you've gone all the way around the entire knot, you will cinch it down until you've got a little round button. This is an ancient way of making buttons before easy drilling of smaller objects or even formed buttons with metals or ceramics were made. If you find that you're running out of line and you need some more, just tighten it down and you will get a little bit more line to work with. Now this is one of those fiddly things that once you have the shape, you just have to keep tugging on one cord all the way around until it gets to the tails. And your tails are going to end up uneven by the end of this. And that is normal. That is completely natural. Don't worry about it. It's just the nature of the beast. You pull on one line and then you find where it goes to and you pull it there and you just keep pulling around and around until you have slowly moved all of the excess line to the tails. Once you have your button, it is ready to have the tails trimmed and to be sewn onto an outfit. You can pair it up with other knots that you've done that have loops and use them as a button and loop on a garment, whether it's a cloak or a mandarin collar blouse or anything like that. Okay, one more time. We're doing that very same Celtic double coin knot. It's a very versatile knot, very commonly used in a bunch of different activities. And this time we're going to be turning it into a wreath. So instead of closing it off, we're going to actually expand it out one more step. How we do that is we take that Celtic knot and we pull down the lower part of the two side loops. Doing this very slowly so you can see. Pull them out. Then it's over, under, over, under, and you now have a braided loop. I know, that looked like magic. That's why I have it as a video, so you can pause and rewind and go back. But don't worry, I'm going to show you again. This isn't the only time. Okay. We take our line, we make our Celtic double coin knot, one loop, another loop over the top, under the tail, over, under, tighten it down, making sure you're not losing track of the tails. And now with that double coin knot still a little bit loose, so that we've got plenty of room to reweave through, we're going to take the lower lines and we're going to tug them out so it kind of makes sort of a star pattern at the bottom. We're going to go inside, in and out, in and out. Now we have a wreath with a nice long tail. We're going to do what we did before, where we're following the exact same line all the way around. Remember, that tail is the same as the long one, so we're just going to follow next to the previous line, keeping our lines flat and not twisting them, so they parallel each other all the way around. Just like we did with the star, just like we did with the simple double coin knot. This time we're going through and weaving around and around. Once you have started on one type of knot, I really do recommend that you make at least a half dozen, if not a dozen, of that one knot before you move on to the next one, just to get your technique down, just to get your practice in. The more you do it, the easier it gets. Your first ones will be either a little bit too loose or a little bit too tight. The tails will be uneven. You won't have had enough line, or you'll cut too much and have too long tails at the end of the project. You'll kind of get used to it over time, but when you're working with these things, the more you do it, the better it gets. And always have a nice audiobook or good music or something on in the background that you find relaxing and enlightening, because your shoulders will get tense. You will be frustrated because it's not going the way that you expected it to. Every once in a while, step away, get yourself a nice warm cup of cocoa or tea, and go back at it once you're a little bit more relaxed, because this is something that you cannot really rush. You need to just take your time and have the patience to work through it. It's a good hand fiddle project that, though it does take some attention, doesn't take a lot of space. And that's it. That is the various different knots. We've got a star. We've got the Chinese good luck knot, sometimes called the good luck flower. We've got the Celtic double coin knot in 4 different iterations that you can try. And I hope that this inspires you to enjoy this craft. It is a lovely type of project to do. The more practice you get, the better your pieces will look, and eventually you can have tons of them to cover your Christmas tree, to decorate for Chinese New Year, to give away as gifts to friends, to applique onto garments or use as buttons on garments. It's really a lovely, fun craft, and something that you can do with your hands without having a lot of extra supplies necessary. I intend to re-release this video, hopefully edited up with some snazzy music or other things happening, but just for my students, I wanted to get this out as quickly as possible so that you weren't looking at your wadded up pieces of paracord going, I learned how to do a thing, and then I forgot how to do that thing. So I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and I hope again to release this on my YouTube channel, general to the public, either close to Chinese New Year, which is, I believe, Sunday the 22nd, 2023, or closer to St. Patrick's Day, when I hopefully will be teaching this class again at the Gallery 1 Visual Arts Center in Ellensburg. Thank you again for joining me on the class. If you were one of my students who wasn't able to make it, I hope this has given you the general overview of what we did while we were in class that day.